There's a strange kind of comfort you find in the hum of a fluorescent light, especially when it's the only light for miles. A gas station on a graveyard shift is like a lighthouse on an empty sea of asphalt. It's supposed to be a beacon of safety, a place to refuel, grab a coffee, and continue on your way. But sometimes that light doesn't keep the darkness out. Sometimes it attracts it. The stories you're about to hear come from people who work that shift. People who saw things in the reflection of the glass that shouldn't have been there, and learned that the most terrifying thing isn't what's hiding in the dark, but what's standing right in the light, pretending to be normal. This happened back in the summer of 2015. I was 19, trying to save up some money for my next semester of college, and I took the only job I could find that paid decently: the graveyard shift at a highway gas station. It was one of those places that felt like it was in the middle of nowhere because the station was a small, brightly lit box surrounded on three sides by a thick, dark forest of pine trees. The fourth side was the highway itself, a long, empty ribbon of asphalt that was usually dead quiet after midnight. For the first couple of weeks, the job was exactly what you'd expect. It was profoundly, soul-crushingly boring. My shift was from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. My duties were simple. I cleaned the coffee machines, mopped the floors until the linoleum shined under the fluorescent lights, and restocked the shelves with chips and candy bars. The rest of the time, I just sit behind the counter, watching the security monitors and waiting for the rare set of headlights to slice through the darkness. The whole place was a bubble of artificial light and the low, constant hum of the soda coolers. It was lonely, but in a way it felt safe. I was the only person for miles sealed inside my little glass and steel box. That feeling of safety disappeared on a Tuesday night in July. It was around 2 in the morning. I had just finished cleaning the bathrooms and was leaning against the counter, scrolling through my phone. The highway had been completely empty for over an hour. When I finally looked up, I saw him. There was a man standing at the far edge of the parking lot, right where the pavement met the dark tree line. He was just outside the main glow of the station's overhead lights, so all I could see was a tall, thin silhouette. He was perfectly, unnaturally still. My first thought was that his car had broken down. I looked past him, scanning the shoulder of the highway, but there was nothing there. No car, no flashing hazard lights. He was just there. I told myself he was probably a trucker who had pulled over to stretch his legs, or maybe he was just getting some air. I tried to rationalize it, to find a normal explanation for a man standing alone in the dark, staring at a gas station. But he didn't move, not an inch. He didn't check his phone. He didn't walk around. He just stood there, facing the store, facing me. A cold knot started to form in my stomach. I kept glancing up from my phone, and every single time, he was in the exact same spot, a statue carved out of the night. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The silence of the station, usually so comforting, now felt heavy and menacing. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably about 20 minutes, he started to move. He didn't rush. He walked with a slow, deliberate pace, his steps even and measured. He walked out of the shadows and into the full glare of the station lights. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, but it was his face that made my blood run cold. He was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, stretched, and completely devoid of any warmth or humanity. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. His eyes were fixed directly on me, through the plate glass of the front doors. He walked all the way across the empty parking lot and didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of the entrance, maybe a foot away from the glass. The doors were locked, a policy for anyone working the graveyard shift alone. He didn't try the handle. He didn't knock. He just stood there, on the other side of the glass, staring in at me with that awful, predatory smile. It felt like he was sharing a secret, a horrible joke that only he understood. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hand started to shake. I couldn't look away from his eyes. I felt like a fish in a bowl, completely exposed. He was watching every move I made, every flicker of fear on my face, and his smile seemed to grow wider. I slowly backed away from the counter, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I needed to get out of his line of sight. I needed to call for help. I fumbled my way into the small, windowless back office, my eyes glued to the grainy image of him on the security monitor. He was still there, motionless, his smiling face pointed right where I had been standing. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone. I managed to dial 911. As the dispatcher's voice came on the line, I watched the screen. The man in the monitor slowly, almost casually, raised his right hand. He pressed his palm flat against the glass of the front door, right at eye level. His smile never wavered. It was a gesture that felt both intimate and deeply threatening, like he was reaching through the screen, through the glass, right for me. Then, just as I saw the distant flash of red and blue lights reflecting on the wet highway, he dropped his hand. He turned, without any sense of urgency, and walked calmly back the way he came. He didn't run. He just walked back across the parking lot and disappeared into the blackness of the woods. The police arrived a minute later. 2 officers swept the area with their flashlights. They found nothing. No man, no car. They even checked the edge of the woods, but they said there were no footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest anyone had been there at all. They were polite, but I could tell they thought I was just a spooked kid, that maybe I'd imagined it. They logged it as a possible prank call and left. I called my manager as soon as they were gone and told him I was quitting. I couldn't spend another second in that place. I waited in the locked office, watching the sun come up until my replacement arrived. I never went back, but the experience had stayed with me. For months afterward, I'd catch a glimpse of a reflection in a dark window, and my heart would seize, thinking it was his smiling face looking back at me. To this day, I can't be in a lit room at night if the curtains aren't drawn. I still feel like someone is out there in the darkness, just watching and waiting, and smiling. I worked the graveyard shift at a gas station off a state highway for about 3 years. When you do that for so long, you get used to the weirdness. You see people at their best and their absolute worst. But after a while, nothing really surprises you anymore. You just learn to lock the doors after midnight, keep your head down, and count the hours until the sun comes up. I thought I had seen it all. Then came a Tuesday night in November of 2018. It was a miserable night. The kind of cold, relentless rain that soaks everything and makes the world feel gray and blurry. Business was completely dead. The only sounds are the steady drumming of rain on the station's metal roof and the occasional hiss of tires as a semi-truck roared past on the highway, its lights cutting through the downpour for just a second before disappearing again. I was just trying to stay awake. I'd restocked everything there was to restock, cleaned everything there was to clean. Now, all I could do was sit on my stool behind the counter, nursing a cup of burnt coffee and watching the rain streak down the big plate glass windows. My shift ended at 6 in the morning, and it felt a lifetime away. Around 1:30, a car pulled in. It was an old, dark sedan, maybe a late 90s Crown Victoria, the kind that looks like an old cop car. The windows were tinted so dark you couldn't see a thing inside. It didn't pull up to the pumps closest to the store. Instead, it rolled slowly to pump 4, the one at the far end of the lot, partially hidden from my view by a big, humming ice machine. The car stopped, but the engine was left running. Its headlights cut 2 bright cones through the sheets of rain, illuminating nothing but the wet asphalt in front of it. And then, nothing happened. Nobody got out. I watched the clock on the wall. 10 minutes went by. The car just sat there, idling. I started to run through the possibilities in my head. Maybe they were waiting for the storm to ease up before they got out to pump gas. Maybe they were finishing a phone call or looking up directions. You see people do it all the time. I told myself it was normal. I went back to wiping down the counter, trying to ignore the low, steady rumble of the car's engine. Another 20 minutes passed. It was now 2 in the morning. The car hadn't moved. The engine was still running. The headlights were still on. My rationalizations were starting to wear thin. A little prickle of unease started to crawl up the back of my neck. Why would someone just sit out there in the pouring rain for half an hour with their engine on? It didn't make any sense. An hour. A full hour had gone by since the car pulled in. The low hum of its engine had become a constant, oppressive presence. My unease had grown into a knot of genuine fear in my stomach. Every few seconds, my eyes would dart from the coffee machine to the security monitor to the windows and back again. The car was always there, a dark, silent shape in the rain. I was staring at it, trying to see any movement inside, when the rain let up for just a moment. In that brief lull, I saw it. The driver's side window slid down, just an inch. A tiny black slit opened in the side of the car. I held my breath, expecting to see a hand, a face, something, but there was nothing. Then, just as quickly as it opened, the window slid back up. That's when I knew something was wrong. That small, simple action felt deliberate. It felt like a test. It felt like someone was looking out from that tiny gap, watching me, seeing what I would do. My heart started to pound. I wasn't just a bored clerk anymore. I was being watched. I got off my stool, walked over to the front doors, and I heard the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding into place. I retreated behind the counter, trying to stay out of the direct line of sight from the windows. I decided I couldn't just sit there and wait. My hands were shaking, but I picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. I kept my voice low, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. On the other end, a car had been idling at Pump 4 for over an hour, and I was alone and felt unsafe. As I was on the phone, talking to the dispatcher, it happened. The car's headlights and engine cut out at the exact same time. The low rumble that had filled the air for the last hour was suddenly gone. The silence that replaced it was deafening and 100 times more menacing. The corner of the parking lot where the car sat was plunged into near total darkness, visible only by the faint, ambient glow from the store. "Ma'am, are you still there?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes," I whispered, my eyes glued to the dark shape of the car. It just turned off. For a full minute, nothing happened. The car was just a black lump in the rain. I thought maybe they had heard me on the phone, that I'd scared them off. And then I heard the faint click of a car door opening. A figure got out of the driver's side. It was too dark to make out any details, just a tall, slender silhouette. They didn't look toward the store. They didn't even glance in my direction. Instead, they walked calmly to the back of the car. They opened the trunk. The figure stood there for a long moment, just looking down into the open trunk. What felt like an eternity passed. Then they reached in, moved something around, I couldn't see what, and closed the trunk with a soft, final thud. Without a backward glance, the figure turned and walked away from the car, away from the station, and melted into the darkness of the woods that lined the highway. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They found the car unlocked and completely empty. They ran the plates. They were stolen from a vehicle in another state. They checked the vehicle identification number on the dash. It had been crudely filed off. There was nothing inside the car. No registration, no personal belongings, not even a scrap of trash. The trunk was empty, too. There was nothing to identify the driver or what they had been doing there for over an hour. The police report just listed it as an abandoned vehicle. But I know what I saw. I saw someone stop, wait, and then attend to something in their trunk before disappearing into the woods on foot. The question that has haunted me ever since, the one that still keeps me up at night, is not who that person was. It's what or who was in the trunk with them. Of all the things I had to do on my graveyard shift, the one I hated the most was taking out the trash. It sounds simple, I know, but it was a ritual filled with a specific kind of dread. I was working at a 24-hour gas station just off a county road in late 2017. The front of the station was all bright lights and glass, a safe little island in the dark. The back, however, was another world. It was a narrow, paved alleyway sandwiched between our building and a dense patch of woods. It was lit by a single, sad-looking floodlight with a bulb that always seemed to be flickering. At the far end of this alley, shrouded in shadow, was the big green metal dumpster. The worst part was the back door. It was a heavy, steel-fired door, but the lock was broken. It would latch, but it wouldn't lock from the inside. My manager's solution was a cinder block that we were supposed to use to prop the door open while we ran the trash out, and then pull it inside when we were done. This meant that for the 30 or 45 seconds it took to drag the heavy bags to the dumpster and run back, the station was open. I was completely exposed. Every single night, my heart would beat a little faster as I wedged that cinder block in place and stepped out into the cold, dark air. On a quiet, moonless night in October, around 3 in the morning, it was time. I put it off as long as I could. I gathered the 2 heavy, leaking bags of trash, took a deep breath, and propped the door open. The alley was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioners and the distant chirping of crickets. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and rotting garbage. I hurried down the alley, my sneakers making soft sounds on the pavement. I reached the dumpster, and with a grunt, I heaved the first bag up and over the side. It landed with a sickening, wet thud. As I lifted the second bag, I heard a sound. It came from the far end of the alley, from the deep darkness beyond the reach of the flickering floodlight. It was a soft, wet, scraping sound, like something heavy and sodden being dragged slowly across the pavement. I froze, the half-lifted trash bag still in my hands. I stood perfectly still, listening. The scraping continued for a few seconds, a rhythmic shhhh, 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 and then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. My mind immediately started racing, trying to find a logical explanation. It's a raccoon. It has to be a big raccoon dragging a piece of trash it found. Or maybe a stray dog. I told myself this over and over, but the sound had felt too heavy for a raccoon. Then, a new sound started. It was a low, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was a steady, patient sound. And it was getting closer. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was methodical, deliberate. My blood went ice cold. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. I dropped the trash bag. It split open on the ground, spilling coffee grounds and sticky soda syrup onto the pavement. I didn't care. I turned and sprinted. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, my breath catching in my throat. The propped open door seemed a mile away. The tapping behind me continued, keeping a steady pace with my frantic flight. Tap, tap, tap. It was closer now. So much closer. I could almost feel it behind me. I pushed myself faster, my eyes locked on the rectangle of light that was my only escape. The moment my fingers brushed against the cold metal of the doorknob, the tapping stopped. The sudden, absolute silence was so jarring it made me stumble. I scrambled inside, kicking the cinder block out of the way. I threw my entire body weight against the heavy steel door, slamming it shut. The sound echoed in the small stockroom. Just as the latch clicked, something slammed into the door from the other side. A deep, solid thud that vibrated through the metal and up my arm. It was so hard, so immediate, that I knew if I had been even 1 second slower, it would have been me. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands shaking so violently I could barely guide it into place. I heard the satisfying clunk as it locked. I backed away from the door, my back hitting a shelf of motor oil, and slid down to the floor, gasping for air. After a minute, I forced myself to my feet. I had to see. I had to know what was out there. I stumbled out to the main counter, my eyes darting to the small, black and white security monitor that showed the feed from the back alley camera. And I saw it. Standing right where I had been, next to the spilled trash, was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs long and spindly like a spider's. It was just standing there, its back to the camera. As I watched, my throat completely dry began to turn. It moved with a slow, fluid grace that was deeply unsettling. It turned its head and looked directly into the camera lens. It knew I was watching. Its face was pale and gaunt in the grainy feed, and it was smiling. A wide, lipless grin. It raised one of its long, thin hands and gave a slow, friendly little wave. A wave just for me. Then it turned away, bent down, and picked up a large, lumpy sack that I hadn't seen before. This must have been what it was dragging. It slung the sack over its shoulder with impossible ease and dragged it back into the deepest shadows of the alley, disappearing from view. I called 911. I was barely coherent, trying to explain what I saw. The police arrived and searched the alley. They found the spilled trash, and they found a strange, dark, wet smear on the pavement leading from the dumpster into the darkness. But they found no figure and no sack. The next morning, my manager came in. He thought I was hysterical, that I'd imagined it all. To prove it, he sat down with me to review the security footage. We watched the tape. We saw me take the trash out. We saw me freeze. We saw me drop the bag and run for the door. But the exact moment I slammed the door shut, the feed from the back alley camera dissolved into a screen of rolling static. It stayed that way for exactly 2 minutes before cutting back to a perfect, empty view of the alley. All the other cameras had worked perfectly the entire night. I quit that day. I never worked another night shift again. I still have nightmares about it. Not the chase, not the thud against the door. The thing I see when I close my eyes is that pale, smiling face on the monitor and that slow, knowing wave. It was a wave that said, "I see you, and I'll see you again." 3 different nights, 3 different gas stations, but the same terrifying truth that the membrane between our safe, ordinary world and something else is thinner than we think. It's in the reflection you can't quite recognize, the car that sits for too long, the sound you hear when you think you're alone. These places are supposed to be points of transit, but for some, they become a final destination. It makes you wonder what else is out there, waiting patiently under the hum of the fluorescent lights. Thank you for listening. Let me know what you think in the comments, and as always, stay safe out there.